Future Warrior, Dawn of the Deimos. Chapter 18. The main Deimos fleet consisted of hundreds of ships of every size and type arranged in formations that outwardly to human eyes showed no perceivable order. The vast mass of dirty brown ships swirling around an empty central point in space, appearing more animal than machine. The fleet had assembled in open space, close to Earth, from where, having refused to follow the withdrawing UEF in range of the Moon's powerful orbital and surface-based defenses, it could provide cover or reinforcements to the landing squadrons in close orbit. There they had remained, maintaining their position for the past several hours, as like the UEF they licked their wounds from the bitter fighting. The space around Earth had fallen quiet. The calm, however, was about to be shattered. On the edge of the dark, swirling mass of enemy ships, there was a sudden, brilliant flash of light that illuminated the space around it, the bright flare of light shining off the dirty brown hulls of nearby Deimos vessels. The light died out as quickly as it had appeared, leaving in its place the unmistakable sleek shark-like profile of an astrology-class battlecruiser. Words on her battle-scarred hull, reading proudly UES Aquarius. Faster than light speed run complete, decelerating, reverse thrusters at maximum. Admiral Yoshiro Matsuda let out the breath he had been holding. Tactical? Contact, enemy fleet, is right where they are supposed to be, only a 0.3 variation from projected entry vector. I am reading multiple enemy vessels close aboard. Matsuda crushed his relief at the news. They had made it into the Devil's Den. Now, they had to live to tell the tale. Matsuda steeled himself. Here we go. Launch all fighters. Colonel Vickers, keep your birds' wings clipped. I don't want them getting lost or left behind when we leave. Tactical. Activate Nexus. Close combat protocols. Have all missile and rail cannon batteries to open fire on the nearest enemy vessels. Concentrate on the bigger ships and change targets after every volley. We aren't going to win this battle with firepower. I want maximum confusion. Communications, send the success code to Fleet Command. Have them commence broad-spectrum jamming. Command, take us in amongst the enemy. Get us so close we will take some paint off and keep us there. I want them afraid to hit their own ships. Show me what the Aquarius can do. Matsuda gripped the sides of his command chair as, under the expert hands of her captain and helm crew, the Aquarius surged forward and began to maneuver. His eyes were drawn to the almost inconceivable size of the enemy fleet around him, their numbers revealed by his 3 DSI helmet's vision, the enemy fleet looking like a vast plague in space. Matsuda was thankful that the astrology class had comfortable seats and the latest console layout, rather than the more Spartan bridge found on the older Pantheon class. He allowed the seats' ample padding to take his physical weight, but there was no relief from the crushing weight of the mental strain that descended upon him as information began to stream in from all his senses, both biologic and mechanical, his body surging with adrenaline. As the Aquarius plunged into the startled enemy formations, she opened up with a torrent of fire, and the horridly beautiful panorama of space combat commenced in earnest as the Deimos vessels began to react to the solitary intruder in their midst. Ignoring the knot of stress in his chest, Matsuda kept his face neutral, a hint of a wolfish grin flashing over his face as the nearest enemy vessels, a pair of Corvette-sized ships, were torn apart by the combined fire of the Aquarius's formidable offensive weapons suite. The battlecruiser not even slowing as it swept past the debris fields that moments before had been enemy warships. Jamming is up, Admiral. The clock is running. Matsuda acknowledged the message and, flicking his 3 DSI helmet's visual mode, glanced over at his NSO. Janet Combs's fingers were flying over her console in a blur of movement, a bead of sweat trickling slowly down the side of her face, her concentration absolute. Matsuda resisted the urge to question her and instead dragged his attention back to the space around his ship. He felt powerless as Deimos fire began to lance out towards his ship, the energy fire impacting the Aquarius's energy dispersal shields and weakening before striking the hull. Around the Aquarius, the UEMC fighters, consisting of 3 full wings that had somehow been crammed into the ship's hangar bays, danced with agility that bordered on the impossible, dodging weapons fire, and striking out like angry bees at any enemy that got close to the ship before darting back. Another series of tremors rippled through the carpet-covered steel decking under Matsuda's feet, the dying glow of the Deimos weapon's fire revealing chunks of armor torn from the flank of the Aquarius. Matsuda sat back and listened intently to the furious exchanges echoing across the spacious bridge, feeling the air crackle with tension. More Deimos fighters inbound. Point 186. Redirect Angel to intercept. I'm reading hull breaches on decks 12, 7, and 6. Automated compartmentalization activating, and damage control teams are en route. Helm, watch your course, 20 degrees down angle. Drop us beneath her. Fire control, do you have a solution? I want to rake her belly as we pass. Plotting Captain, port side batteries 3 and 4 tasking now. Captain, magazines through C are dry. Switching to D and E. Weapons control is reporting a malfunction on one of our forward rail cannons. Appears related to the breach on deck 7. Another has been knocked out by enemy fire. Matsuda glanced at the time code displayed in corner of his vision. Only minutes had passed since their arrival. To Matsuda, it felt more like hours. The Aquarius swept on, leaving the wreckage of dozens Deimos vessels littered the surrounding space. Chunks of vessels the size of houses scraping down the Aquarius's sides as she fought to avoid being boxed in by the enraged Deimos ships, who were now almost fighting each other in their fury to get at the UEF warship. There was a sudden bright flash, and a hail of powerful energy fire slammed into the side of the Aquarius, the explosions rippling across the forward section of the ship and tearing at her armored hide like invisible claws. With a violent shudder, the whole ship lurched, the awful sound of tortured, screaming metal filling the bridge. Matsuda watched in stunned horror as an entire section of a ship surrounding one of the two port-side hangar bays, including the massive reinforced doors themselves, tore free from the ship, leaving a massive gaping wound that could swallow a corvette. As he watched in mute fascination, explosive decompression racked the surrounding sections of hull, tearing off thick plates of armor. From the wound itself, a torrent of debris spilled into space as an entire hangar bay filled with weapons, equipment, and people was sucked into the dark, cold embrace of space. The bridge lights flickered and then went out before being replaced by rerouted power a moment later, as if the ship itself was in momentary shock at the fearful damage inflicted upon it. Tearing his eyes from the destruction, Matsuda turned and searched for the perpetrator, his heart missing a beat as he saw the massive, brutish shape of a Deimos vessel on an intercept course. The vessel was immense, easily as big as a Unity-class battleship, its bulk dwarfing the smaller Aquarius and the surrounding Deimos vessels. Matsuda knew instantly that they couldn't hope to face it and live. They had only one choice: to run. Captain increased to flank speed. Get some enemy ships between us and her before she fires again. We can't take another hit like that. The Aquarius charged forward with a speed that belied her size, leaving a trail of bleeding wreckage behind her. She had just passed behind a large cargo vessel and a destroyer-sized warship when the Deimos battleship opened fire again, and a hailstorm of massive bolts of energy tore through the crowded space after the fleeing Aquarius. The unfortunate Deimos cargo ship took the worst of it, catching almost the full blast, her lightly armored hull being shredded like paper under the assault. The Deimos destroyer also suffered, losing her bow to a powerful energy round, the impact sending her cart-wheeling nose over tail before a salvo from the Aquarius's stern rail and pulse cannon batteries cut her in half. Matsuda gripped his seat tightly as the Aquarius went into a steep climb and glanced back over his shoulder just in time to see the massive shape of the Deimos battleship crash through the wreckage-filled space and begin to climb in pursuit, smaller ships fleeing to get out of its way. Admiral, the Deimos are starting to burn through the jamming. Matsuda felt his heart sink. Janet, there is no more time. Janet Combs didn't look up as her fingers whirled across her console as if possessed. Almost there. 30 seconds. We don't have it. Send what you have now. Matsuda turned from her. Command, get us an escape vector. Colonel, recall all fighters, hot landing protocols. Janet, is it done? Janet's hands lay still on her console, and despite the climate-controlled room set at a cool 18 degrees, sweat poured down her face. Yes, Admiral, it's done. How many entry vectors did you get set? All but 6. I set them to come in on our transponder signal. The ship lurched as more heavy rounds bracketed her hull, but Matsuda didn't seem to notice as he gaped at his NSO's audacity, suddenly feeling immense pride at her conviction. You did well, Janet. On the edge of the solar system, in a dark patch of space, a mass of shipping sat silently in the gloom. No light or radio wave emitted from the collection of over 100 merchant ships of all shapes and sizes, engines set on their lowest power settings, the fleet completely silent. Amongst them was the more bullish profile of a Pantheon-class cruiser, the darkness concealing the lettering on her hull, which showed her name as the USS Athena. The Athena, like all Pantheon-class cruisers, was an older ship, a type eclipsed by the newer City class. Her looks, however, were deceiving. As part of a continuing process of life extension and fleet modernization program, she had only just emerged from a 2-year refit before the outbreak of the war against the Deimos, the extensive overhaul making her virtually a new ship. Nevertheless, her hull already bore the scars of battle, her crew having distinguished themselves in the Third Fleet during the bitter engagements around Altair and Ross 154. Her current value, however, wasn't in the ship's firepower or the crew's tactical prowess, but in a brand new and highly sensitive electronics and communications suite fitted to the ship during her refit, a system that was busily sniffing out the surrounding space for any sign of intruders or incoming signals. All at once, a torrent of information began to flow into the surrounding space. It was what the Athena had been waiting for, and after a moment to verify and authenticate its source, the coded data was rapidly transferred to the waiting ships around her, and the silent fleet came to life. In a matter of moments, the fleet's engines came to full power before, in a carefully crafted split-second sequence, the unmanned merchant ships left with a flash on their one-way journey. The dark patch of space being torn with the rippling flashes that marked their departure until only one vessel remained. The Athena's new captain, Sandra Jansen, waited for another 60 seconds after the departure of her charges before giving the order, the cruiser disappearing with a flash. With her departure, the cold dark of space returned to its eternal isolation, showing nothing of the fleet that had once been there other than a rapidly dissipating energy signature. All fighters are on board that are going to make it, Admiral. Excellent, Colonel. Captain, how soon until we are? Matsuda never heard the sound of the impact, but heard clearly the sound of his arm breaking as he hit the bulkhead. His head began to swim, and his vision turned cloudy. He brought up his hand to wipe his face, and it came away red with blood, the bright red arterial liquid running down his forehead and dribbling off the end of his nose. For a second, he looked at it dazed, the crimson-red blood spilling onto the ground and turning black as it soaked into the blue carpet. The bridge was filled with chaotic noise and dust, and here, in their bodies, lay twisted and contorted in unnatural positions. Matsuda dragged himself to his feet and leaned against the cold steel of the wall. Report. All stations, report, damn it. The Aquarius's captain and a Marine guard appeared at his side and took Matsuda by the shoulders and returned him to his command chair, while from the bridge doors a medical team rushed in. A bridge officer appeared beside the captain. We have lost control of the helm. Navigational and weapons guidance are down. We're a sitting duck, sir. Matsuda turned to see the prone form of his NSO on the ground, a medic by her side, and was relieved to see her still breathing. Did you hear me, sir? We are a dead stick. She won't answer the helm. Matsuda turned to face the group of bridge officers that had gathered around him and wondered if it was the same as Admiral Lev had faced when he had lost his last battle, seeing the expectation of the order to evacuate in the eyes of the men and women around him. Matsuda glanced at the lights, seeing that they were still on, and wondered where his 3DSI helmet had gone. Do we still have main power and propulsion? Yes, sir, answered the TSO. Where are we pointing? There was a moment of confused silence. I said, where is the bow pointing? anyone. One of the officers, still wearing a 3DSI helmet, glanced forward. "Into open space, sir. Are there any Deimos ships in our path?" The man looked again. "Yes, sir. There's a pair of frigate-sized warships in our line of sight." Matsuda didn't hesitate. "She'll hold. Activate high-speed engines now." For a moment, no one moved. "Sir," the captain spoke, "navigation is down." Matsuda fixed him with a cold stare. "I don't care, Captain. Hit the engines now, or we're all dead." The TSO, ignoring the glances from the captain and the other bridge officers, reacted first, and after taking 3 brisk steps, hit the light-speed engine controls. The Aquarius disappeared just as another lethal volley of energy fire was unleashed from the Deimos battleship, the rounds hitting nothing but empty space. The 2 Deimos ships, unlucky enough to be in the battlecruiser's path, were smashed into oblivion in an instant. Their wreckage spread several thousand kilometers along the Aquarius's exit trajectory. Just as the Aquarius made her spectacular exit, others made their equally dramatic entry. As like the spears of avenging angels, the merchant vessels arrived on their preset courses. Exiting light speed, the mass of ships careened through the Deimos fleet, hitting with unimaginable kinetic force. Dozens of Deimos ships, unable to take evasive action in the mere moments of warning they had, were torn asunder by the blizzard of merchant ships. The velocity of the merchant ships, combined with their mass, meant that even as they struck one Deimos vessel, both would break up, sending masses of debris spiraling, doing even more damage to other Deimos ships close by. The effect was like glass bottles being struck by a burst of buckshot. Deimos ships were torn asunder or shattered into unrecognizable pieces. The Deimos battleship pursuing the US Aquarius being amongst them, as it was bludgeoned by 4 merchant ships coming in onto the Aquarius's last position. Numerous merchant ships passed clean through the Deimos fleet without hitting anything. Many came down into Earth's atmosphere, burning up spectacularly, while others skipped off the atmosphere into deep space, eventually to hit distant stars and asteroids far from known space or explode as their engines overheated. Even as the last of the merchant ships finished tearing its destructive path through the Deimos fleet, a nearby patch of space came alive, a single flash marking the arrival of the US Athena. The cruiser ran a sensor sweep of the shattered and disorganized Deimos fleet before sending a single signal. Moments later, the space around the cruiser came alive with rippling flashes. Led by the Athena, the UEF home fleet charged into the wreckage-filled space, the scene coming alive with a dazzling array of weapons fire as the true carnage began. The sky all over Earth lighting up with dazzling shooting stars and flaming meteors, and debris was dragged down by the pull of the planet's gravity well. Stalker crawled forward and, using his rifle-mounted camera, carefully peered around the corner of the building. The street was filled with rubble and debris, many of the houses lining it having caved in roofs while others were blackened and burnt out. "Looks deserted, boss. No movement." Stalker didn't need to turn a look at the prone form of Link behind him, knowing instead that he was plugged into a leg-mounted socket that allowed him to see what Stalker saw. "Yeah, Link, not a lick of the enemy. Maybe you've missed the whole thing while you were resting in the arms of the nurses at the casualty station?" Link grinned behind his helmet. "I don't mind missing the battle, as long as I'm here at the end." Stalker shook his head, glad to have his friend and second-in-command back. Despite the jokes, Stalker knew that the casualty station had been no picnic. Hundreds of dead and dying men and women, overstretched medical staff, and sporadic enemy artillery fire adding to the carnage. Link had remained there just long enough to get patched up, a nurse resetting his broken ribs and dislocated hip and giving him a heavy dose of painkillers. Link had then formed a scratch unit out of walking wounded and had rejoined the fighting. "This is Sword Point Lead. The way ahead is clear. Move up." Behind Stalker and Link, the rest of the reconnaissance force slid in along the rear of the building. The scratch unit consisted of men and women from various formations who had volunteered for the dangerous assignment. Black Armored Terra, Nova, stood alongside USAC commandos, armored cavalry troopers, and RDR soldiers from several different units. When the orders had come down from General Sukbatar that he wanted recon units sent out to probe the enemy, Stalker had volunteered to lead one in his sector immediately, passing command of the battered 21st Terra Nova to Link, who in turn had promptly handed it to the CFO. After a quick scrounge around for ammunition, Stalker had led the hastily formed recon force past the front line, the defenders busily digging in along the new line of resistance, and began his search for the enemy. The advance had so far been tense, but uneventful, and the city had fallen much quieter, but the sounds of sporadic combat could still be heard in the distance. Stalker had no doubt that the Deimos hadn't gone very far, and it was up to him to find out where they were. As Stalker waited, the recon force filtered through the house and set up covering positions. At their signal, Stalker leapt up and sprinted across the street, Link 3 seconds behind him. Stalker hit the wall of the house at a run and thrust his rifle into a large hole that had been blown into its side, probably by a mortar round, Stalker guessed. The house looked deserted, everyday items lying scattered on the floor where they had been thrown by the blast. The possessions of everyday life reduced to meaningless dust-covered battlefield detritus. Stalker was about to move in and through the house when he spied something, and he felt his heartbeat increase. Just visible around the corner of a central hallway was the barrel of a rifle, a Deimos energy rifle. Stalker froze and looked at it for a moment. The angle of the barrel was away from him, and it was lying flat on the ground. Carefully sighting on where an enemy would be if there was anyone holding the weapon, Stalker edged around the corner centimeter by centimeter. The entire rifle was almost fully in view when Stalker saw a clawed Deimos hand. Stalker felt his trigger finger tension increase in response, but kept down the urge to fire. Something was wrong. The hand itself wasn't gripping the rifle and instead was open, and from the clawed fingers hung threads of grayish skin. Stalker kept easing around slowly, his finger a bare fraction of weight off, pulling his ASBR's trigger. As the Deimos came fully into view, Stalker's tension became mixed with surprise. The alien was dead. It lay slumped against the passageway wall, its wide shark-like mouth open in a silent, deathly scream. Its skin was blotchy and mottled. Deep scratch marks ran down either side of its face, and Stalker realized it had clawed at its own face in its final moments. On the wall opposite and on the ground around it were splattered pools of bile and vomit mixed with the now distinctive yellow-green blood of the Deimos. More of the vile fluid still wet where it had run down the creature's chest armor. Stalker looked the lanky alien over, but could see no obvious wounds of signs of injuries. Rifle first, Stalker stepped gently into the room, painfully aware of the noise the grit was making underfoot. Keeping a watchful finger on the trigger, Stalker reached out with his ASBR's barrel and touched the Deimos on the side of the head. It remained still and lifeless. Satisfied, Stalker moved slowly forward, aware in his peripheral vision of Link following his lead and slipping into the building. As he walked forward, Stalker peered out of the house's open back door, seeing to his surprise that there were more Deimos bodies on the ground. A group of them scattered around the open rear doors of a seemingly intact slider. As he edged closer, Stalker saw there were dozens of dead Deimos, all of them clearly having died very painful, messy deaths. Suddenly, Stalker became aware of movement to his side, and on instinct ducked and swung his ASBR around. A shot went off with a crack, and a bolt of red passed just inches over Stalker's head, leaving a smoking hole in the wall. As he spun, Stalker smashed the barrel of the enemy rifle aside, the weapon going clattering to the ground, and in the same movement brought his ASBR to bear on the enemy. With a great effort, Stalker checked himself and didn't fire. In the side doorway, a Deimos was propped up into a sitting position, one of its arms supporting it, the other now deprived of the energy rifle that now lay discarded on the ground. The Deimos was covered in its own blood and bile. It had torn off its chest armor, and Stalker could see that its chest was rising and falling erratically. Stalker held up his hand to signal Link, who was ready to charge forward at a moment's notice. For several seconds, Stalker just stared at the Deimos, the creature returning the stare, its dark eyes burning with hatred and pain. As Stalker watched, it went into convulsions and threw up more blood and bile and hacking coughs and splutters. As it did, it brought up a hand and wiped some of the fluid from its face, never taking its eyes off Stalker. Its hand was bandaged with some type of a biological bandage, and in the same instant Stalker saw recognition flash across the alien's face as it flashed across his. Stalker lowered one hand and touched his sword's scabbard, the Deimos growling in a deep rumbling voice in response. The Deimos raised one of its bloody clawed hands and pointed at Stalker with 2 fingers, its voice filling the room as it swept its hand over to the other dead Deimos. Although Stalker did not understand the words, the meaning was all too clear, the alien's eyes burning with recrimination and anger at what had been done to it and the others. Stalker had no words and could only stare wordlessly. The Deimos dropped its hand and slowly drew a wicked-looking twin-bladed knife from a sheath on its side, Stalker feeling his fingers inch a millimeter tighter on the trigger. The Deimos gestured at him with it before throwing the weapon back into the room behind it in obvious disgust, cold fury in its dark eyes. Stalker watched, unable to do or say anything as the Deimos went into violent spasms and arched its back violently before falling back still, its chest still and its eyes becoming empty and motionless as the life drained out of them. What the hell is going on here, boss? Stalker just stared at the alien's rapidly cooling corpse. I have no idea, Link. No idea at all. Stalker activated the TACnet. Saber Ops, this is Sword Point over. This is Saber, go ahead. Saber, we have a situation here. I have encountered enemy infantry. They're all dead or dying. Possible biohazard. Please advise, over. Roger, Sword Point. We're receiving similar reports coming through from other sectors. Appears to be widespread. Wait 1, over. Stalker glanced to Link, who was already activating his commnet. Spartan 2-1 to all units. Activate biohazard protocols now. Sword Point, this is Saber Ops. Roger, Saber, go ahead. Sword Point, you are to withdraw immediately and return to friendly lines. Over. Stalker and Link exchanged glances. Confirm your last, Saber? Confirmed. Withdraw from your position and return to friendly lines immediately, Sword Point. Saber Ops out. Stalker shrugged in response to Link's unasked question, and as one they withdrew from the house and its scenes of death and started the trek back to the relative safety of the front line. After a cautious but uneventful withdrawal, Stalker approached the front lines and signaled the sentries, keen to avoid being shot by an enthusiastic reservist. As the recon force passed back through the line, confusion spread through them. Something was afoot. APCs and IFVs had moved close to the front, and together with commandeered civilian vehicles were loading up soldiers and equipment at a furious pace. Link grabbed a passing RDR sergeant. What's going on, Sergeant? The man looked as angry as Link and Stalker were confused. You wouldn't fucking read about it, Specialist. I just lost half my platoon holding this cursed place, and now the brass decide to give it away to the enemy. What do you mean? Orders from up high. All forces are to withdraw to the opposite bank of the Rhine immediately. Link and Stalker and the rest of the recon force stood in stunned silence as the man spat on the ground in disgust, and with a torrent of colorful language went back to organizing his men's loading of their weapons and equipment. Stalker quickly dispersed the recon force back to their units and headed straight for a group of 21st Terra Nova soldiers, the men of his CCU coming to meet him. You believe this shit? Stalker just stared at his CSO, sharing the doctor's exasperation. Well, screw it, I guess. The man says we go, we go. Stalker and the CSO watched as Link walked away and began to round up and organize the scattered men of the 21st Terra Nova and get them ready to move. Stalker nodded his acquiescence to the CSO, who with the rest of the CCU went after Link with new purpose in their stride. Stalker stood alone for a moment, watching the furious activity around him. Men both alive and dead, weapons, ammunition, medical equipment, everything was being packed up, loaded up, and moved out. Stalker adjusted his frequency and activated his TACnet. Sunray 2, Sunray 2, this is Alpha 2-1 over. A moment passed before Stalker heard the familiar voice of Bid D come over through his helmet's comm system. Go for Sunray 2, Sunray Alpha 2-1 is preparing with withdrawal behind the Rhine as ordered. Request confirmation, over. When he replied, Stalker could hear the tension in D's voice. That is confirmed, Alpha 2-1. Orders came straight from top hat control. Nothing to be done, over. Roger Sunray. All received. Alpha 2-1 is Oscar Mike. Say again on the move out. High Admiral Louis Francois Tourville stood on the bridge of his flagship, his hands clasped behind his back. Through his highly polished dress boots, he felt a slight tremor pass through the ship's hull as the massive forward batteries of his flagship fired at the fleeing Deimos vessels. One of the destroyer-sized ships was caught in a hailstorm of fire and was torn to pieces, the ship dying in a silent panoramic explosion. The others dodged the salvo, and clearing the debris field disappeared with a flash as they jumped into faster-than-light speed. All squadrons report the enemy is breaking off and jumping away. Sensors also show enemy landing forces are also withdrawing. Looks like a general retreat, Admiral. Shall we pursue? Tourville thought in his usual distracted manner for a moment. Send cruiser squadrons 3 and 7, but have them keep their distance. Recon only. We have done enough for today. No sense in pushing our luck. Yes, Admiral. Tourville paused and dispatch a squadron to locate the Aquarius. Yoshiro Matsuda sat on the floor in the dark wreckage-strewn room that was the bridge of the Aquarius. A dull ache filled his head, and reaching up he touched the bandages gently. Already feeling blood beginning to soak through, the bridge medical kit's coagulant powder having already been used on the more severely wounded. In the gloom, Matsuda could see shapes moving. People were busy at work. He was unsure how much time had passed since they had left the battle around Earth, time seeming not to exist anymore on board the Aquarius. Here and there the glow of emergency chemical lighting pushed back the darkness, and muted curses testified to the lack of progress. Any word of the forward damage control teams? From nearby, the voice of the TSO answered. No, sir. At last report, they were still cutting their way forward along Deck 15. Structural damage is severe, and finding a path through the vented sections to reach any pockets of trapped survivors is proving slow going. Matsuda had known the answer before he asked the question, but the waiting and feeling of helplessness was grating. The Aquarius was drifting in space. All internal communications were down, and the main and backup fusion reactors had shut down automatically to prevent core damage. The forward sections of the ship that had taken the brunt of the impacts with Deimos vessels during the escape were cut off by crumpled bulkheads, and whole sections of the ship were exposed to the cold vacuum of space. Matsuda knew many of the men and women under his command were dead, while still more were fighting for life. More lives lost or changed forever because of the war against the Deimos. A war he had never sought but was destined to fight, but fate, it seemed, didn't make the cost any easier to bear. Admiral, I am getting a signal on the emergency TACnet. It's for you. Matsuda snapped out of his thoughts. He would mourn the dead later when those who still lived were saved. In the gloom, he felt a portable communication set thrust into his hand, and carefully he placed the earpiece in one ear and raised the bulky old-style device up to his mouth. Go for Matsuda. Admiral Matsuda, this is Admiral Sanderson on board the UES Venus. Be advised that we have entered close orbit and are preparing to provide assistance. What is your current status? Matsuda felt his heart jump in his chest. The Venus was a massive planetary-class battleship. You are most welcome, Admiral. We have lost all major systems, including propulsion and weapons. Say again, we are a dead stick. We require any medical and tech teams you can spare over. All received and understood. Help is on the way, Admiral. Please advise your crew that we will be moving to take you under tow as soon as possible. You're more than a little exposed out here. Matsuda couldn't contain himself anymore. Admiral, what is the current tactical situation? We have heard nothing since we left Earth. The day is ours, Admiral. The Deimos fleet has taken heavy losses and has withdrawn from the system. While on Earth, the remaining Deimos ground forces have largely been contained or eliminated. You did a great job and saved countless lives. I've been sent here with direct orders from the fleet commander himself to see you and your ship safely back to Earth. Matsuda leant back against the wall, feeling the weight finally lift, his headache disappearing in an instant. For the moment at least, Earth was safe.